Good everyone. Today we are going to look at Sumifs, Averageifs, and Countifs function in Microsoft Excel. This is our sample worksheet. This is the worksheet we are going to use for this demonstration. So the first thing we are going to look at is find the total sales for the below criteria. February, white shirts that were sold in February, white shirts that were sold in February in the United States. So we're going to use some ifs to solve this particular problem. The first one equals to some ifs. Now, one thing about some ifs is that you can use some ifs for a single criteria or for multiple criteria. That's one good thing about some ifs. So if I say some ifs, some range is going to be the sales revenue. Control Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria range 1. Now the criteria we're looking at is February. So where can I find this February? I can find it under the month column. Select the month column, put a comma. Criteria 1, I will reference this G5 where I have February written. Press enter. So that's the answer there. For the second one, we're going to look at white shirts that were sold in February. So put an equal sign, some ifs, just double click to impute the function there. The sum range is the revenue, Control Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria range 1, where can I find this February? I can find it under the month, put a comma. Criteria 1 is this February. I just reference it from the cell. You can hard code, but it's better when you reference from the cell. I'll put a comma. Criteria range 2, where can we find the white shirts? You can find it under the product column. Control Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2, I'll reference this H6 where we'll have the white shirt written. Press enter. That's the answer. So the last example for this sum ifs, my equal sign, sum ifs, double click to impute the function. Sum range remains the sales revenue, Control Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria range 1 is the month, put a comma there. Criteria 1, I'll just reference this cell G7, put a comma. Criteria range 2, that's where can we find this white shirts? Under the product column, Control Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2 is white shirts. I'll just reference that H7, put a comma. Criteria range 3 is the countries column, Control Shift down arrow, I'll put a comma. Criteria 3 will just reference this I7 where we have the USA rating. Press enter. So we have solved everything here. This is the sum ifs. Now let's come to the average ifs function. Average ifs. Find average sales for the below criteria. Like I said, you can use some ifs to solve for just one criteria or multiple criteria. Put my equal sign. You can see average ifs. Average range remains the sales revenue column. Put a comma. Criteria range 1 is the month. Control Shift down arrow. put a comma. Criteria 1, I'll reference this G11 where we have the February written, and I'll press enter. That's the answer there. So the second example for the Averageifs, put my equal sign. Averageifs, double click. Average range remains the sales revenue column, put a comma. Criteria range 1 is the month, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 1, I'll reference this G12 here, put a comma. Criteria range 2, I'll select the product, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2, select the white shirt, and I'll press enter. The last example under this Averageifs, put my equal sign. Averageifs, double click to impute the function. Sum range is our sales revenue column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria range 1 is the month, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 1, select reference the G13, put a comma. Criteria range 2 is the product column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2, reference this H13, that's a white shirt, put a comma. Criteria range 3 is the country column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 3 is the USA. Press enter. So that's it for Averageifs. Now let's come to the last example, which is Countifs. Find out how many shirts were sold for the below criteria. Like I said, you can use Countifs to solve for single criteria or for multiple criteria. Put my equal sign, type in Countifs, I'll double click to impute the function. Criteria range 1 is the month, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 1 is G16. I'll just reference this G16 where we have the February there, and I'll press enter. So you can see the answer of that is 8. Let's come to the second example under this Countifs. Equal sign, Countifs. Criteria range 1 is the month, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma there. Criteria 1 is February, that's G17, put a comma. Criteria range 2 is the product column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2, I'll reference this H17 and press enter. The answer there is 4. So let's look at the last example under this Countifs. Put my equal sign. Countifs, I'll double click to impute the function. Criteria range 1 is the month, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 1 is February, I'll reference G18, put a comma. Criteria range 2 is the product column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 2, select white shirts, which is H18, put a comma. Criteria range 3, the countries column, Ctrl Shift down arrow, put a comma. Criteria 3, I will reference this I18 where I have imputed the USA. I'll press enter. The answer is 3. So we have completed our task for today. Join me in my next video where I will explain more of Excel functions.